Ecuador's main indigenous organization suspends talks with the government over the persecution of its indigenous leaders. Thousands protest in Uruguay against the constitutional reform that could put more military on the streets. Polls closes in Botswana, a cliffhanger election that might see the end of the decades-long dominance of the ruling party. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Ecuador's indigenous umbrella organization CONAIE has suspended talks of fuel subsidies with President Lenin Moreno, citing the government's persecution of its leaders. Following 2 weeks of violent protests, a dialogue table was established between indigenous movements and other social sectors and the government over President Moreno's austerity measures. Aside from fuel subsidies, CONAIE also wants to include other topics in the debate, such as a review of the agreement with the IMF, oil contracts, and the financial situation of public companies.
We have stopped because there was no atmosphere of dialogue. We cannot be at the table while they are chasing us, and that is why we have asked for some time. We do not want to simply discuss the issue of subsidies. We have asked for it. We want to review the oil contracts that the state has. We want to review the stake of public companies like CNT and Ecuador, other state companies. Why are there no resources? Why are we living like this? We have also asked Richard Martinez that we want to review the agreements. What terms did they agree with We have stopped because there was no atmosphere of dialogue. We cannot be at the table while they are chasing us, and that is why we have asked for some time.
Moving on to Chile, where on Wednesday morning the existence of an alleged torture center inside of a metro station in Santiago was made public. According to reports, the station, part of the Baquedano metro, was being used by security forces to illegally detain and torture citizens. Authorities from Chile's National Institute of Human Rights have visited the site and have begun the pertinent investigation. According to the director of the institute, an habeas corpus request has also been filed as part of a case in which a young man was allegedly detained here. The discovery comes in the middle of massive protests and violent repression that have left 18 people dead, hundreds injured, and close to 2,000 people detained.
Someone has to take responsibility for the death and for the hundreds of injured under this state of exception. Without a doubt, one of the first people who come to mind is the Interior Minister, Andrés Chadwick. And the lower house of Congress has the unavoidable obligation to investigate these accusations. We cannot let this situation stand. There are 18 deaths, hundreds injured. We are now even hearing claims that a stop in the Baquedano metro is being used as a torture center. Someone has to take responsibility for this.
A 48-hour strike continues in Chile as workers' unions and social movements condemn the ongoing repression and militarization of city streets. The strike is in support of massive popular mobilizations that have paralyzed the country for 6 days. Citizens have come together against the country's neoliberal model, in particular growing inequality and repression. Chileans living abroad and other supporters have also gathered in the capitals of Ecuador and France to show solidarity with the protesters in Chile. In Quito, dozens were demonstrating outside the Chilean embassy, while in Paris, about 200 Chileans waved flags and banners to show their support.
Most people over there are very worried. I feel like there is a part of the population that can remain on the sidelines. They don't feel necessarily affected, so they don't get involved. They are people with a good social position, but personally, my family and friends are involved and are extremely worried because they are confronted by the violence and repression every day in the streets. So, no one knows how it's going to evolve or degenerate.
The port city of Valparaíso has been one of the most active during the recent popular uprising against the neoliberal model in Chile. By the decision of dictator Augusto Pinochet, the city was declared the seat of the country's Congress. As such, protesters have been demonstrating in force.
These pictures in Valparaíso explain why the Chilean government has stopped preaching about human rights. Those firing at students are part of the police special forces. The city's young mayor says that President Sebastián Piñera has already been defeated.
We have deaf politicians who are not paying attention to people's demands. We have a president who for days made speeches focusing on what he called vandalism. Even the right wing has turned against him. They are even proposing a national unity cabinet, and history has taught us that when this happens, it means that the government is on the wrong path.
Tuesday was the National Day of Health Workers, but this was the treatment they received in front of Congress.
This march had been called for a month or so ago to defend people's right to health care, because private business are encroaching on public health care and are leaving us without resources. The repression we've seen is a direct response to social upheaval. This uprising must lead to a new healthcare system in Chile.
But the repression is divided by social ranks. The police special forces do the dirty work, while the Marines keep their hands clean in front of the cameras. Some protesters even try to reason with them. Meanwhile, media outlets insist on highlighting looting and burning instead of the people's demands for social change.
We are seeing this debate on the streets. The people are fighting against traditional media outlets. We are seeing a different relationship of power within the citizenship. They are condemning the media for stigmatizing and criminalizing social movements.
In the face of a media blackout, what we need to do is demand from journalists, especially those who came up during democracy after the dictatorship, to wake up. We need their help. We need help showing what's really happening on the streets, to show how they're killing us.
Organized workers also joined the popular uprising.
We have set up a dialogue table with 3 goals: an end to the state of emergency, the resignation of Piñera, and to move forward with new reforms that guarantee workers' rights. We want an end to repression. We want to talk about the causes of this movement, not the consequences.
The curfew in Valparaiso starts at 6 p.m., but on the road leading to Santiago, people are not concerned.
First, as workers, we are demanding President Sebastián Piñera to remove the military from the streets. That's the first thing we need to do, because the cops of militarizing the streets is paid by the people. The dead are always put by us, because they have protection and are in power. Piñera and his band of thieves are supported by big businesses.
The dictatorship probably never really left, but the resistance was never dead either.
We move on to Bolivia, where President Evo Morales has denounced an ongoing coup attempt against his administration.
I have called for this press conference to denounce, in front of the Bolivian people and the world, that a coup attempt is underway. While we knew this beforehand, the right wing has mobilized with international support to carry out a coup. I want the world to know that until now we have persevered with patience in order to avoid violence. We have avoided confrontations and will continue to do so. But I want to tell the Bolivian people, I call for a state of emergency and for peaceful and constitutional mobilizations to defend our democracy. But how is this coup attempt happening? They are not letting us finish the vote count from Sunday's elections. They are burning down the regional headquarters of the Supreme Electoral Court. They are targeting the campaign houses of our party and are threatening elected senators and governors.
Our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, has the latest.
President Evo Morales has warned that a coup attempt is underway against his administration, but also against the results of the electoral process from this past Sunday. Official results are not yet available, as vote counting is still underway by the Supreme Electoral Court in their headquarters and in regional offices. President Morales also spoke about a conspiracy by the right-wing opposition to prevent all votes from being counted and from final results to be tallied. He added that international groups are helping the opposition to destabilize the country and carry out a coup, and that he will continue to defend democracy in Bolivia and the electoral process. Mobilizations by his supporters are set to start soon, as Aymara campesinos from La Paz will gather in the San Francisco Plaza at noon during the first mobilization by social movements in support of democracy. Another group is set to mobilize is the Bolivian Workers' Union. These organizations will mobilize across the country to hold vigils in highways and major cities to prevent any violence from erupting. These events are a direct response to opposition civic committees that declared the start of an indefinite national strike in the Department of Santa Cruz, which is being enforced violently. These civic committees also said that if the Supreme Electoral Court does not call for a runoff between President Evo Morales and opposition candidate Carlos Mesa by noon on Wednesday, they will recognize Carlos Mesa as the president-elect of Bolivia.
Meanwhile, thousands of activists from various social movements have taken to the San Francisco Square in the capital La Paz to show their support for President Morales. People waved flags and held banners with slogans like "No Second Round," referring to a possible runoff vote for the presidential election. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has expressed his solidarity with Evo Morales in the face of attempts by the Bolivian opposition to block his victory. He called on the non-aligned movement and other international bodies to defend the Bolivian president.
Comrade Evo Morales has denounced an unfolding coup attempt by the right, with international support, for 2 months. The right had been saying it wouldn't recognize a victory by President Evo Morales. It's a coup that was foreseen, foretold, and which the Bolivian people will defeat. They will defeat the violence, and this new attempt by the right to destroy Bolivia's democracy and destroy President Morales. There is a conspiracy against the indigenous leader Evo Morales, against the indigenous leader of the South, which they announced it in advance and they incited violence. We ourselves have suffered the same thing, and we know what the Bolivian people are going through right now.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Thousands have also taken to the streets in Uruguay to protest against a constitutional reform. Protesters marched in one of the main avenues of the capital, Montevideo, ahead of a referendum on a constitutional reform that will be voted alongside general elections on October 27th. The reform seeks to introduce life sentences for the worst crimes, create a new National Guard, and allow police to conduct night raids.
Truly, I'm very afraid that the military will be on the streets, because I was in the dictatorship and I saw how terrible it was. I don't want the military to be on the streets. I don't want that to happen in Chile. I don't want it to happen in Argentina or in Ecuador. I don't want it to happen.
Bahamas Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis has invited 250 nationals to return to the Commonwealth country from the U.S. a month after the passage of deadly Hurricane Dorian. Dr. Minnis said their time in the U.S. has an expiration date, adding that the displaced will be accommodated. According to the Bahamian Consul General in Miami, Linda Mackey, 60% of the Bahamian evacuees in Florida are from Abaco and are living week to week on the support of local charities. It's over a month since the Category 5 storm decimated the islands, killing more than 60, leaving hundreds missing and thousands displaced. In Grenada, people will soon find it more difficult to deposit funds in financial institutions that were attained through SOSO or pyramid schemes. The Financial Intelligence Unit says additional guidelines must be met as part of its efforts to combat financial corruption and money laundering. This comes as trends were observed of large amounts of funds being deposited into accounts by people claiming they were from a SOSO. A SOSO is an arrangement among a group of people. Each person person makes regular contributions to a fund, the total of which is withdrawn by each individual in turn. Zimbabwe's main opposition leader has suffered a major setback as the country's Supreme Court maintained that his leadership role is illegitimate. The court has indefinitely reserved judgment in a case in which MDC leader Nelson Chamisa was challenging a ruling by the High Court declaring his leadership as illegitimate. In May, the High Court ruled that former party vice president was the legitimate leader of the party. Chamisa then appealed to the ruling and turned over. The wrangle had started after the death of party founder last year. Protests have broken out in Ethiopia hours after police surrounded the house of ethnic activist and media entrepreneur Jawar Mohammed. The police raid came after a warning by the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed against media owners fomenting unrest. Jawar said he did not know who had ordered the deployment of police and the removal of his guards, but he believed it was a planned assassination. Meanwhile, hundreds of Jawar's supporters gathered outside his house, but protests quickly spread to other cities as well, with reports of 4 people being shot in Ammo.
For sure, you have to know that the Prime Minister, in a parliamentary session, made an open threat against me and the media. I cannot say for certain if he gave the order to remove the security and the foiled plans, but I'm sure the officers, whether it's intelligence or the police, who orchestrated this act, were following certain orders.
South Africa's main opposition party leader Mmusi Maimane has resigned from his position, citing challenges in making the party appeal to a majority of black voters. The Democratic Alliance Party is widely supported by the white minority in South Africa. In the past 25 years since the country gained independence from the apartheid regime, the party has failed to convince the majority electorate, leading to leadership squabbles. Maimane's resignation is the second departure of a senior black leader in the party in a matter of days.
Over the past few months, it's become more and more clear to me that there does exist a few within the DA who do not see eye to eye with me. I don't share the vision for the party and the direction it was taking. There have been several months of consistent and a coordinated attack on me and my leadership to ensure that this project failed or I failed.
Polling stations have closed in Botswana's general elections. The electorate voted between the country's ruling party, Botswana Democratic Party, which has been in power since the country's independence from Britain in 1966, and the main opposition umbrella for Democratic Change Party. Early polls had suggested a slight win for the ruling party and a possible runoff. The BDA party suffered a blow when former President Ian Khama left the party in May after clashing with his successor, Mawetsi Masisi, and shifted his support to the opposition party. Results are expected to be out by the end of the week. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From Us Off. The United States has lifted sanctions on Turkey for its military operation in Syria barely 2 weeks after they were imposed. U.S. President Donald Trump announced the decision after Turkey has said that it would make the ceasefire in Syria permanent as long as the Kurdish fighters withdraw from Syria's northeastern border. Earlier this month, President Trump halted negotiations on a $100 billion trade deal with Turkey, raised steel tariffs back up to 50%, and imposed sanctions on 3 senior Turkish officials and Turkey's defense and energy ministries.
Early this morning, the government of Turkey informed my administration that they would be stopping combat and their offensive in Syria and making the ceasefire permanent, and it will indeed be permanent. However, you would also define the word permanent in that part of the world as somewhat questionable. We all understand that, but I do believe it will be permanent. I've therefore instructed the Secretary of the Treasury to lift all sanctions imposed on October 14th.
Russian forces in Syria have advanced to the shared border with Turkey to ensure that Kurdish fighters pull back from the northern region. This comes after a deal between Moscow and Ankara on Tuesday that requires Kurdish fighters to pull back to a line 30 kilometers from the border along its entire length. The withdrawal must be finalized within 150 hours. Hundreds of people have gathered in Turkey to protest against the arrest of 4 pro-Kurdish mayors. The 4 were detained on Tuesday on allegations of having ties to the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party. Since municipal elections in March, Ankara has replaced a total of 12 mayors from the People's Democratic Party, or HDP, on alleged links to terrorism. It has also been reported that dozens of criminal cases have been opened against people around the country for criticizing Turkey's military operation against Kurdish militants in Syria.
They went through an operation and occupation on some other states' land in order to avoid internal turmoil in return. As I said before, they did what they can do for Kurds' benefits, for Kurds' right to vote and to be elected.
It's time to struggle against fascism shoulder to shoulder. Therefore, first I call on all elected people and on Turkish society. We are here, we are struggling against fascism shoulder to shoulder. Come give power to this movement. Come and change Turkey. Come and build democracy and an honorable peace.
Protesters in Lebanon have set up fresh blockades to close highways leading to Beirut, despite the army moving to reopen key roads. Protesters are back on the streets for a 7th consecutive day as banks, schools, and universities remain closed. The protest, Lebanon's biggest in years, broke out on Thursday over the government's plans to impose new taxes. But they've since widened into calls for the country's entire political class to step down. The protesters have also declared a general strike, sending a clear signal that they reject the measures Prime Minister Saad Hariri's government agreed to on Monday. Protests in Catalonia have been ongoing since October 14th, when the sentence against the politically imprisoned leaders of the independence movement was announced. The Spanish president, Pedro Sánchez, made a surprise visit to Barcelona on Monday.
The meeting couldn't take place because of all these people. Pedro Sánchez, president of Spain, came to Barcelona this Monday on a lightning visit. He had planned to meet with Teresa Cunillera, the delegate of the Spanish government in Catalonia. But the demonstrators had prevented that from happening by blocking access to the government delegation building, the place where the meeting was scheduled.
The president of Spain, Sanchez, said he was coming to Barcelona to speak to wounded policemen. He has not spoken about meeting our wounded people, nor has he spoken of sitting down with our president Torra, not to speak nor to begin to have a dialogue. That's denied by Spain once again, as it has been for 10 years.
I've come because I believe in this. I've been here since 2012, when the first demonstrations began, up until today. And the sentence was the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm not going to stop. I will be at every demonstration, either during the week or on the weekend. It's the same.
The Spanish government has shared these images of Pedro Sánchez visiting the National Police Force after tough clashes with demonstrators last week.
I wanted to transfer them. We feel deep gratitude in the name of the government of Spain, and I dare to say the whole of the Spanish society does too.
Before arriving in the Catalan capital, Sanchez had sent the Catalan president a letter accusing him of not having sufficiently condemned the violence in previous days. Despite the fact he had done so on up to 5 occasions, the Catalan government has lamented for the upteenth time that the government of Madrid refuses to engage in dialogue with Catalonia.
It is politically unacceptable, morally unacceptable, and institutionally unacceptable that President Sanchez excuses himself with the fact that President Torra has not condemned the violence because it is false.
That afternoon, committees for the defence of the Republic organised action against the government's delegation, setting loose balloons filled with paint. In doing so, they were calling for the resignation of the political leader of the Catalan police. And at the end of the day, the Democratic Tsunami platform ensured that the repeated requests for sincere dialogue between Catalonia and Spain will materialise in the form of a hashtag on Twitter. The hashtag is Spain Sit and Talk, and have turned it into a global trending topic.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at teleserenglish.net. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Teleser English, I am Stefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo